What's up, everybody? David here for this week's Griscom stream. Hope you're doing well wherever you are at. This is LR, the home of barbecue socialism. These are the Griscom streams. We like to hang out and hear from everyone in the chat, talk about some stories. So really stoked to be here, friends. We got some good stuff to get into today. Just going to say really quick up top, really excited to be releasing this conversation that's going to be coming out probably either this Sunday or next Tuesday. Our conversation with Amina Sheikh, who is a really incredible union organizer who wrote a great piece in the Rosa Luxemburg blog about what's going on in Canada with the right wing, and also some really critical lessons for us on the left to figure out just what is happening. You know, we talk a lot on this program about class de-alignment, and some of the successes that the right wing has been able to have in speaking to people's, feelings of alienations and worries, while always, directing them in a more reactionary and right wing bent. And the fact of the matter is, though, is that we can make excuses, we can complain, but we have to win. So speaking with her was really enlightening, and I'm still sort of buzzing from that conversation. So that should be out again either this Sunday for patrons or on the main show next Tuesday. We're also going to have Luke Savage on the show soon as well to talk about Trump DeSantis, something that Matt and I have been ever more interested in. But again, folks, feel free to jump in the chat with any questions or topics you want to hear me cover. These are always better when they're a little bit more interactive. I got a few clips for us to go through just to get us started. And don't worry, friends, we are going to talk about Mr. Elon Musk shipping out part of his Tesla facilities from my hometown here in Austin, Texas, and what that means for folks. But maybe just to set us up before we can start getting some questions and getting those stories about Tesla, I wanted to take a visit with our buddy Howard Schultz at Starbucks, who has overseen a really brutal crackdown on unionization efforts at his companies as he has been, he comes back out of retirement basically to crush unions. And he's leaving now. And I think like the big innovation in the company, other than union busting, has been NFTs, a little late in the game, and olive oil coffee. But I'm not in the position to judge anybody's favorite beverage of choice, but I am here to judge this sound clip right here, which is pretty nasty shit. And I think really explains not only who Howard Schultz is, the kind of company that he's built at Starbucks, and how hostile it is to working people and unions. But I think it also really highlights a really clear division in like the union movement that I think a lot of people at the top either don't understand or purposefully try to obfuscate, complain that these aren't real demands that unions should be making. But let's just play this. This is from his CNN interview just the other day.
The primary reason that I was interested in trying to run for president was the very essence of helping people try, based on the life that I've led and where I grew up, to create an opportunity to get out of the malaise that they're in.
But I think some of those people are the ones that are pushing for unionization now and looking to you as the head of the company to come to the table with them.
And
right?
when I ask them, what is it that you want that you don't have?
Yeah.
Is it more benefits? It's generally not wage or benefits. Most of the time they say something to me like, we want a seat at the table. And so what does that mean?
You're about to leave this country.
What does that mean? Well, I think it's pretty clear what that means. People think about it. The way that the system that our economy is set up, you're spending the vast majority or significant portion of your waking life at work. Is it surprising that people are saying, hey, I want to have a little bit more input about the conditions that I'm working in, about the culture that I'm in, about my experience when I'm at the work site? I want to be able to influence that and not just hope and pray that out of the kindness of your heart, you'll take some of the things that we're saying into consideration. No, that's why you unionize. That's why you organize. And that's why you build working class power, right? And this is the thing from Starbucks to what happened with the railroads when Joe Biden and the Democratic Party all united with the Republicans to shut that strike down. What were the concerns there as well, right? The concerns there were about scheduling, right? This kind of, anti-human scheduling that has become predominant in the railroad industry, and safety. And we're now living through an experience of seeing what happens when you don't heed or listen to working people who understand these systems, in East Palestine, in Ohio, right? And all across the board, you're seeing working people rise up and say, we want unions, we want to be organized, we want to have a say in our life, right? Not just in public, not just in politics, but at the workplace, right? Extending democracy into the workplace. And this is a fundamental concern, right? Because wages and benefits are one thing, but you'll notice with all these companies that they're willing to sort of push the numbers up a little bit on how much of the wages that they'll give workers. But they are not willing to play this game of letting working people be able to have more and more influence over production, over working conditions, over safety rules, right? Because capitalists understand that there's two sides to what they get to do as working people. One, they get to sit on their ass and take advantage of the fact that other people are doing the labor, and then the bosses and the people at the top of those companies get to enjoy all the profits from that. But two, that they get to dictate conditions to their workforce, right? So if they want to do something like cut wages or increase hours or make conditions more difficult and dangerous, um, they don't want there to be any kind of pushback, right? They don't want anybody to say, "Hey, Norfolk Southern, it doesn't make sense that you're over here um, not investing in safety equipment for the railroads. It doesn't make sense that you're over here not investing in the brake systems on the railroads while you're also buying back your stock at a historic rate." Right? They don't want that conversation to happen. They would be much happier, giving people maybe a 10% raise or something like that. Not saying a raise is bad, right? We want raises, but they don't want to ever like permanently give up this kind of power and control that they have over working class people. And from Starbucks to the railroad industry, to what's happening right now at Google, you can see this kind of resistance. And I'm going to go to the chat and start taking some questions. So get some of those in there, folks, and we'll be able to, hang out. It's always great to hear what folks are thinking about and what's on y'all's mind. It helps Matt and I out a lot trying to figure out what we want to be covering on the show. But before we get there, I was going to play a video for this, but ironically, YouTube has been cracking down pretty exceptionally um, on sound, so much so that like I can't play any Bernie Sanders videos anymore because I get in trouble with copyright. But I did want to highlight this and show some solidarity to something that's happening right here in Austin. The several dozen contractors for YouTube Music are fighting a push to return to in-person work. Their strike has gained support from the United States Senator Bernie Sanders and U.S. Representative Greg Casar. A group of contractors who work for Google's YouTube Music service are in their third week of picketing in Austin, and what their union says is the first strike in the company's history. Their efforts have received attention and assistance from Greg Casar and Bernie Sanders, as backers hope the strike will inspire more labor organizing in the tech sector. And this is huge. I mean, this strike, this mobilization, this militancy is truly inspiring because, as we say time and time again on this program, we really need to have a, all front strategy when it comes to union pushes in this country. And seeing the demands coming from, the tech sector along to like things like in the service industry, along with, folks like in the railroad industry, we really need a multi-pronged, attempt at this. And this is something that's really exciting. But just like with Starbucks, just like with the railroad unions, just like with Warrior Met, these companies come down really, really hard. Greg Casar says there is a facade that tech workers are all making the big bucks. And that's simply not true. There's enormous inequality in the tech sector, just like there is across the country. The contractors on strike are employed by Cognizant Technology Solutions, which does work for YouTube Music, a subsidiary of Google, which is owned by parent company Alphabet Incorporated. They began striking on February 3rd, 3 days before they were required to return to in-person work at their Austin headquarters. The workers say the in-person mandate came in November, 3 weeks after the YouTube Music workers filed for a union election with the National Labor Relations Board, drawing accusations of retaliation for their filing to unionize. But Cognizant says the order came down in December 2021. This company, which is very clear. So just to put this in simple terms, what they're doing right now is there's going to be a push, to have an election, right? And the company just out of nowhere is saying, oh no, you guys have to come to in-person work. And over the past few years, what has happened? More and more people have sort of, because Austin is becoming incredibly unaffordable for people, including, this is again too, like, this is a thing, like when we talk about union stories sometimes, like, it's really unfortunate that it's like this, that it's just like the same kind of things show up time and time again. One company's trying to mess around with the elections, right? The real election deniers are corporations in this country. Two, this contract, this two-tiered work, right, where you're having some people being paid less to do the exact same amount of work as others, in a way to be able to increase your workforce without having to pay for that kind of workforce. That also makes it really hard to organize, right? Because people who have those kind of more permanent jobs, those non-contract jobs, have this kind of feeling of superiority. Oh, I don't need to stand up for those people on the chopping block. I don't need to risk my salary, my benefits, my position for these other folks, right? It creates this kind of anti-solidarity conditions. But again, you get this kind of nonsense here from Cognizant, which is the contractor for these YouTube music workers. Cognizant respects the right of our associates to disagree with our policies and to protest them lawfully, but said it was disappointing that workers have chosen to strike. He also said workers accepted their jobs knowing they were in office positions and that Cognizant is the sole employer of these employees, not Google or YouTube, right? And just like when Musk was stealing from people here at the Gigafactory in Austin, the contracting too is like, you have to be really dense to believe these kind of things. When you're sitting here saying, "Oh, well, it's the contractor. The contractor's the problem, right? The contracting company is the problem, not the parent company. The parent companies hire these contracting companies so that they can get legal shields, so that they can get public relations shields from the way that they are treating their workers. Because at the end of the day, the work that's being done by these workers is benefiting Alphabet, is benefiting YouTube. So the separation nonsense is something that, again, you have to be really, really dense to sit around and believe. So solidarity with all of those workers here who are fighting and going on strike, and I'm really excited to see more and more of the stuff in the tech sector and all across the board. But folks, let's. I see there's a bunch of things in the chat, so feel free to ask questions or bring up a topic if you want to hear me talk about it for a little bit. We will talk and a little bit about Tesla moving their engineering headquarters out of Austin. But we'll get back to that in a second. I want to make sure I'm getting y'all in here. All right, let's see. We got a question from Carrie. Carrie Scott, who says, David, if we get U.S. citizens own utilities and resources, we can end poverty and fix reparations and stop paying for water. 70% of crime goes away. Please discuss. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and, over estimate the effects of these things, but no, 100%, we should be taking utilities, and particularly things like water, right? Water, if you've been watching Left Reckoning for a while, y'all will know that we've been talking a lot about Wall Street's interest in controlling water systems, right? More and more Wall Street backed funds are sitting around buying up farmland and land that's adjacent to rivers so that they can own water rights, particularly in the Western United States, because they understand that water and who controls the water in the next few years is going to be really, really critical all across the country, but particularly in the Western part of the United States. So 100%. I mean, it's one of these things too, where like these are old school American values, ideas of public lands, of public access to water. It was really a transition in the late 1800s to 20th century where we started to consider these things to be private property in the first place, right? So it's, everyone knows the MLK quote. It's like, why in a world that is, majority water do we have to pay a water bill? I totally agree. That's something that we should be fighting for. And on the other side, electricity is how we is the keystone of like modern life, and we don't need to have private corporations sitting between us and power production. These things work a lot better when they're publicly controlled and publicly owned. Something like the TVA, I think a lot of people on the left and progressives don't recognize how incredible the Tennessee Valley Authority was when it came into place in the South, right? It took a part of the country that private industry was not interested in investing in, right? Private industry said, we don't want to produce electricity for these poor Southerners, right? We're not going to be able to get a return on our investment on this, right? And the TVA came along and electrified significant portions of the South with dual missions: one, to electrify the South, and two, to provide affordable electricity to working people in the South, right? An incredible part of the New Deal. The TVA stands as one of the best models of electricity production in the country, and it's something that we should see expanded. There's a lot of really exciting things happening in the TVA, for example, when it comes to reducing carbon emitting production for electricity. I was reading the other day um, for something that Matt Huber was sharing on Twitter, that it looks like TVA is about to invest pretty significantly, hopefully, in its nuclear power facilities, and hopefully building up something around 20 small modular reactors. And that's another thing that we've seen a significant amount of exciting news on. I'll just also do a quick shout out here. I was really happy to see this. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. On Twitter, using her massive platform to talk about things like, sorry for my phone battery being super low, but talking about things like recycling energy. Y'all probably can't read that, can you? I'm sorry. But if you go on AOC's Instagram story, you can see it, and she's talking here about the French nuclear energy industry, and particularly the way that France has been recycling nuclear waste, which is something we should certainly be using in the United States. And it was really encouraging to see somebody like AOC, who has a huge platform, talking about clean energy like that. Clean energy that is not intermittent, a clean energy that provides permanent jobs for people. So that's something that's very exciting. But I totally agree with you, Carrie. I think if a lot of times right now we're talking about what do we do on the left. We're sort of in this post-Bernie moment, in the sense that, like, the sense of maybe lining up behind another presidential campaign might not be what's immediately in front of us. You're seeing the left go in 10 different directions, a lot of them really depressing and pessimistic, and a lot of them not really wanting to sort of work towards strategies that sort of break from the democratic socialist movement or the progressive movement, just sort of being junior partners of the Democratic Party, right? Which I think would be a disastrous legacy if that's where all this energy goes. I think energy is something that touches everyone. Like, especially if you live like in a state like Texas. Like, if you've experienced what it's like to have your power go out for days, you realize that we desperately need to have much stronger control over these systems. In Texas, a lot of times people talk about the crisis during Winter Storm Uri as being that Texas isn't a part of the national grid. And that's certainly true, right? We should, it just makes rational sense to want to have as large of an electrical grid as possible. But also, the reason that grid failed is because of this hyper marketized system that rewards taking risks with our electricity production. So the fact is that the natural gas pipelines failed during the winter storm. But the reason they failed is because most of that infrastructure is controlled by private companies. Those private companies did not want to risk or spend the money up front to weatherize those systems, because it doesn't typically get that cold in Texas for that long, that long period of time. And if you are holding the lottery ticket, as some of these electricity providers were saying, and you were still able to produce electricity in Texas during the storm, you got astronomical rates of return on your investment into the electrical system, in the sense that, like, we have a hyper marketized auction house system in the state of Texas, which meant that the power plants that were still producing power were able to charge an arm and a leg, and were sending people bills for thousands upon thousands of dollars for keeping their lights on during a storm, right? Which is no way for a rational system to work, right? So these are things that, like, they touch on everything. Like, electricity touches everything. It touches climate change, it touches class, it touches democracy, and it touches the privatization and the pilfering of, like, the capitalist class, right? So I think this is 100% where we should be spending our time, because not only do you have all of these issues from, like, a political standpoint to build up our power, you look at the unions that are engaged in electrical work. Those are very powerful, very progressive unions that should have a much larger say and much larger representation on the left. These are the people that folks should be listening to. So I think that's a great point. But let's see. We got some more questions. Adam S says, why did the Warrior Met coal mine strike fail? What are the lessons learned? What needs to happen for the next strike to succeed? Any personal thoughts or leftist sources have this knowledge? Well, one, I think probably in the early days, one of the best breakdowns that we've had, apart from our coverage on Tuesday on Left Reckoning, is Kim Kelly's piece in The Nation. And, she makes a really powerful argument, I think, in there about how, what really happened with Warrior Met Coal. And for people who aren't familiar with Warrior Met Coal is a coal mine in Alabama where workers went on strike for 23 months. The coal company, um, back about 5 years ago, the coal company was suffering and it was not doing very well. So the workers agreed to take a temporary pay cut with the understanding that once the coal mine was profitable again, that they would return to the previous wage benefit system, or more what they had considered and had expected. In fact, was that it would be increased, right, to make up for their sacrifice. That the management, the ownership of the coal mine changes and gets bought out by New York City, Wall Street capital, and the coal mine becomes more profitable than ever, and the workers expected that they would be starting to see some returns on the sacrifice that they made to make sure that this coal company could continue functioning. And the New York City based capital said no, and the workers went on strike. They went on strike for 23 months, and something that's probably is, I believe, is the largest labor strike in Alabama history, one of the longest ones in recent memory in the United States, and one where you saw the Democratic Party, both in the state of Alabama and on a national level, apart from none other than people like Bernie Sanders, completely ignored them, completely ignored them. What happened there? There's all these questions, right? And I think that there's one thing I think that's important to remember. Top line is that when we talk about going on strike, that's a conflict, that's a battle, right? And sometimes we're going to lose. And I think that sometimes, it's important to like you should be inspired. You should see things like strikes as a really important and inspirational activity. But people also need to understand that there are risks involved. And that's why laying out the groundwork, right, to be able to have strike funds, to be able to have solidarity, because what happened to these workers? They're going without wages, which meant that, the people in the community and all these folks put together things like food drives, toy drives, to be able to sustain themselves over this 2-year period, right? That takes a lot of work to be able to do, and you have to be prepared and have the capacity to do that. And they were successful in actually being able to ride out um, this strike, but the company didn't budge. And the company didn't budge, one, because the high price of coal meant that they were able to sustain the labor losses and still make money. Two, the state gets involved in the sense of, I mean, like the state, like the big state, right? Like the police, the legal system, all these things, and waged war on workers. So they were limited in their ability to picket and prevent scabs from coming into the facilities. And there was a general media silence for the most part on this strike. I think the Democratic Party was uninterested in showing up for these people in a way that I just find to be completely despicable. Because this is, if the Democratic Party was serious about winning, right, this is exactly the opportunity to start showing up for working people and to say, look, where is the governor? Where's the Republican governor of this of your state? Where are y'all senators? Where are y'all's Congress people? Right? Are they here backing you? The Joe Biden administration is backing you. Of course, we know why Joe Biden isn't interested in doing that, because he's in bed with the exact same people who were profiting off of breaking the back of labor in that strike. But two reasons basically. I mean, there's a few reasons, right? If just to give you a quick rundown again. High price of coal, the ability of the coal company to be able to stockpile coal meant that they were able to weather the storm. The lack of political involvement from the Democratic Party to be able to support these workers, build more national attention and support for these folks. And the use of the police and the use of the legal system, which are biased against working people, to basically act as a second strike-breaking force. So really devastating. And we're going to be covering this more. It's still early because they're going back to work now. So, there's going to be questions about, for example, what rank and file members think about the union, like the big union, the UMWA, if they think that like going back to work was the right call. I don't want to speak for people, so I'm going to be, watching carefully, and we'll be covering that as we start to see those things come out in the next few weeks. But I appreciate that question. All right, let me just make sure I'm not missing anyone's. And this is a good point from our friends over at Twitch, and we do appreciate all of our Twitch listeners. TOS Snitch says the electrical energy corporations have cut employees' maintenance, trucks, equipment, spare equipment, and moved that money to executive pay bonuses. Thus, during a disaster, it takes much longer to restore power. Yeah, no, you're seeing this in all across the country. I mean, like, look, the deregulation of electricity in this country has had devastating effects. Certainly in places like Texas, but in all of these other states that have, Texas is like the best at deregulating shit and making it worse. But it's coming to a place near you, and it's been the trend on the in the electrical system in this country for 2 decades now. And these kind of things, I know sometimes they can be a little boring to talk about because they're not the most exciting thing ever. But you should get passionate about these things because, again, when the power goes out, like, you really feel it. When your electricity bills go up, you really feel it. And this is something that, like, once that affects people, they're going to be looking for answers. And there's all sorts of BS out there, culture war nonsense, even about electricity, which is amazing how advanced the culture war in this country, that we can do things from basic, medical procedures to limit the effect of a pandemic, like in COVID, to how we power our homes, into culture wars. People look for answers though, and like we absolutely need to be already organizing. And building up, a movement that talks about electricity for the people, that says we think that electricity should either be extremely cheap or ideally free, for working people. Because what is very likely going to happen, what you were already starting to see, is that wealthy communities are trying to separate themselves, from these larger grids, right? Because they don't want to have to deal, with the crises that come from communal, or larger electricity production, because they see that because of austerity that there's a lack of investment in these kind of things. And we really could be living in a future, like, not too far off from now, where we have dirty, fossil fuel heavy, expensive electricity for poor and working class people, and clean renewable energy on a decentralized grid, for the rich, right? And we really need to not lose that battle now, because it's happening right now, and I don't think that the left is really showing up, enough, to fight back on this kind of thing. I would always appreciate hearing from Ange. Ange says, "Does Left Reckoning need an Australian correspondent?" We certainly. I mean, I love our Aussie listenership. I mean, it's always amazing. I can look at the the stats of who listens to it. Australia, really dominant, really dominant portion of our audience. So I feel bad we haven't done enough Australia content. I'd love to do something with you, Ange. If you ever want to, let us know. Um, we think about y'all a lot. I'm not as tuned into the Australian politics though as y'all are into ours. Feel bad. All right, let me make sure I'm not missing anybody. And then we can get to maybe some of this Tesla stuff. And I'm always keeping my eye on the chat. I'm just a couple minutes behind y'all, is all. Well, let me get back to the taking questions in a second, because I want to celebrate a little bit. I'm sorry to our California listeners, but we have some nice news here, in beautiful Austin, Texas, um, where Mr. Elon Musk, announced yesterday that Musk engineering headquarters means Tesla is a California, Texas company, which is one of the biggest bullshit cope headlines I've seen in a long time. On Wednesday, Tesla CEO Elon Musk showed off the company's new engineering headquarters in Silicon Valley in a joint news conference with California Governor Gavin Newsom. The new headquarters means Tesla is now a California, Texas company, Musk told CNBC. And let's translate that from bullshit talk. He's moving his engineering team and his engineering headquarters to California because he doesn't want to be here no more. But what does he want to keep? He wants to keep the insane tax breaks that this government and the local government gave him to move his fucking company here, where he's not investing in the community. He's literally taking money out of schools, local schools here, because he got such an insane sweetheart deal with Travis County and Del Valle ISD. He wants to maintain those kind of things. He wants the headquarters, the company, the corporate headquarters in Texas so that he doesn't have to pay taxes, while he's going to be moving the jobs, the engineering and that kind of work out of Austin after only 2 years, and moving them back to California. I mean, look, I'm just going to please give me a moment to be happy about this, because the less Musk in this community, the better. Austin is in a fight right now for its soul. More and more people, like, I'm from here, my family's here. More and more of my friends and family are no longer able to live in the town that we're from. And we're quickly being replaced by, hyper wealthy people who have no interest in the community, no interest in their neighbors, and are building up. The thing, you can really feel it in Austin when you drive around, particularly some of, the kind of older, like, single family home neighborhoods, where you'll have places that, like, used to have, like, used to be traditional kind of Texas 2-3 bedroom at really small cottages, right? I'm talking like 1,200 to like 700 square feet. Like, that was a traditional home in Texas. And you're seeing those homes being demolished, and they're replaced not with multifamily housing or anything like that, but with literal concrete walls, right? Where some, like, super wealthy tech guy from California who moved out here for whatever company's been moving out here to pay less than taxes, has built up, because he doesn't want to see his neighbors, right? The front porches and things like that I grew up with are being bulldozed over for people building up literal fortresses in parts of town all around Austin, right? It's disgusting. I'm all for, development. I'm all for having more investment and more job opportunities for people here. But what you see more often than not is when these companies come here, they're not hiring local. They're bringing in people who are then pricing folks out of their communities, and working with the real estate industry to basically push out, traditional residents of Austin, Texas, right? So the less the better. But it's 100% true. The point here is that what he's doing is he's taking those positions back to California, because those people don't want to work here, but he wants to keep the tax breaks. So I'll just say this: Governor Greg Abbott, I think that it's very, when you sit here and you say, don't California my Texas, right? Texas is not going to play by California rules. I agree with you. Let's do it. Let's stand up for Texans and say to Elon Musk that if he doesn't want to invest in Texas, if he doesn't want to build in Texas, that we are going to scrap those sweetheart deals, right? Don't let Texas be taken advantage of by people like Gavin Newsom and California, to fund their lifestyle at the expense of everyday working Texans. It's time for you, Greg Abbott, to stand up to California and be a tough guy, that guy we all know you are, and say to Elon Musk he's not welcome here, and we're not going to give him these kind of benefits. So let's see if we can make him pay his back taxes that we erroneously gave to him in the first place, and start demanding that California capital and California tech industry has no. We're not going to let those people come over here and take advantage of good working Texans. Probably won't work, but why not? I do want to talk a little bit about some other things that have been happening with Tesla, because for people who have been watching the show, they opened up their Gigafactory where he's making those ugly ass trucks here in the Austin area. And there's a pretty significant labor rights violation suit against Elon Musk, against Tesla, because they were not paying workers, right? So the people who literally built the Gigafactory for him, where he's making those Tonka trucks, he didn't pay people wages, right? They denied people overtime. They denied people holiday pay. But they also were handing out people fake OSHA certificates, which if you don't work in the construction industry, that might not raise the kind of alarm bells that it should. That means that people are working under conditions that there are certain safety protocols that they need to do to keep themselves safe and to keep others safe, right? And you go through these safety module courses to make sure that people know how to protect themselves from very serious industrial accidents. They were literally knowingly handing out fake certificates to people without training them or giving them any of that information. Workers were asking for it, saying, I need to know how to do this safely. And they weren't letting them do that because they want to get this thing done as quickly as possible. One of the workers in the suit alleged that they were oftentimes working on flooded floors after a rain with with exposed wiring, meaning that people could get electrocuted. One of them came home and told his wife that he thinks he's going to die in the gigafactory. No worker should be talking about those kind of conditions, right? That's the kind of shit that Elon Musk has been bringing to Texas. Not innovation, not the future, old school worker exploitation. But this is not unique to Texas. This is the Musk brand. And if you guys have been seeing, there has been a really inspiring push out in Buffalo, which is producing their solar panels. There's been a union push there, right? Tesla's a company that has been founded in a lot of ways on the principle of being anti-union, right? Musk is one of the union busters in chief, along with Howard Schultz. And there has been a union push in Buffalo where they produce they're producing Tesla solar panels. Tesla denies union busting claims in Buffalo. The company said recent layoffs were part of a routine performance review cycle and not response to organization efforts. I'm going to call bullshit on that right now, friends. Tesla says recent layoffs at its Buffalo, New York facility were part of a routine performance review cycle, and that is, quote, false, that it fired employees in response to a new union campaign. The Workers United Union previously alleged in a complaint filed with the United States National Labor Relations Board that the company fired dozens of employees at the plant in retaliation for union activity. In a statement posted to its website in response to false allegations, Tesla said a bunch of bullshit. But when you talk to the workers there, the story is very, very different. It's absolutely clear that Tesla is trying to find a reason, a legal excuse to put firing workers who have been engaged in unionization efforts. In fact, Tesla moved up its performance review calendar to coincide with these firings, right? Because they were worried that people were going to win and continue organizing a union at the Buffalo facility that produces solar panels for Elon Musk. These workers, for example, I'll just read this last bit. One Gigafactory 2 employee who was part of the union organizing committee said they were told they were, quote, exceeding expectations prior to being fired by Tesla. I got COVID and was out of the office. Then I had to take a bereavement leave. I returned to work and was told I was exceeding expectations. But then Wednesday came along and they were fired. There's no doubt about it that this is retaliation. And instead of, hearing me explain how important this is, I figured it'd be nice to let some of these workers speak for themselves. This is from the great folks over at More Perfect Union US. We'll just play a minute or two of this, and then I'll come back and take some questions.
Workers at Tesla's Gigafactory in Buffalo, New York are attempting to form the company's first union. It's a huge development at one of the most anti-union companies in the country. So we went to Buffalo to hear firsthand why Tesla workers want a union.
We'd like to create a voice for the workers and allow us to speak to upper management and really negotiate with them. I wish for the workers to be treated in a way that's as sustainable as the products we're trying to make.
They avoided naming or shaming Elon Musk, Tesla's infamously anti-union CEO, in hopes that he might be willing to work with them. But on Wednesday afternoon, Tesla suddenly fired at least 30 workers at that Buffalo Gigafactory, including several of the union organizers. Workers say the connection is pretty obvious.
They want people to come in tomorrow concerned and worried and then see people they like get fired. That's the point, to make everyone scared and sad and upset.
Tesla couldn't just fire 30 people out of the blue without any reason, though, so it made one up. The performance reviews scheduled for mid-March were suddenly moved up a month, then turned into a mass labor violation wipeout.
This is all just a scare tactic. The company is claiming that these people are on track, at least to be observed for their performance because it was maybe lacking. But normally that's a much more difficult process. It takes a couple months to do. They got to do all this data, blah, blah, blah. But they did it today because of the union went public yesterday.
Everybody was sitting ducks in a way, like you were just working and then someone would leave to go in a meeting with a supervisor and then would just be, given a box.
And there's a lot of people just like, especially on that second break after they were doing it, there was a lot of people like crying all over the building. And the woman from HR just keeps packing up boxes to give to people. And there's like a creepy amount of boxes still on her desk.
It was just a really heavy time. And when I asked my supervisor about it and asked why they weren't telling people what was happening, she said that they didn't want to instill mass panic. And we were already there, essentially. Because no
Jesus
one knew what was
Christ.
going on.
You know, there's a reason why nobody knew what was going on. Not only did Tesla management fire 30 workers, it flat out lied to the rest of them.
This morning in our regularly scheduled morning meeting, at the end, some higher up kind of briefly was like, oh, there's going to be some workshops happening throughout the day, and it's going to be for select analysts. So if you get an invite for that, just keep your eyes open. It's just for select analysts. But they said it was going to be a workshop about benefits, and then a bunch of people just got fired. We were kind of thinking it was going to be something where they were going to be like, look how great it is, thinking they were going to pull all of us in and just be like, look how great it is here, blah, 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 blah. But then 30 plus people got fired, so.
I mean, look, and it's as clear as day. That's an intimidation tactic. It's an intimidation tactic from somebody who thinks he's above the law. He thinks he's above the law. Here in Texas, the state government and the local government here have given him every indication that that's the fact when they give him literally millions of dollars in tax breaks to one of the wealthiest people in the world. And he also gets that on a national level when, so-called Union Joe is completely silent on what's happening at Tesla. What lined up with the railroad companies and the Republican Party to block the railroad strike that has now had significant human consequences in terms of what's happening in East Palestine. And Joe Biden sent a similar message when 23 months passed and he could not show up once for the workers in Alabama at Warrior Met Coal. And, I say this not out of somebody who's sitting here at the edge of my seat expecting the Democratic Party to start walking the walk and fighting for working people. We know what they are. But what's really dangerous about this is when you do not have any kind of mobilization from the Democratic Party, it creates opportunities for the right to be able to speak to people's correct feelings of frustration and alienations and feeling that they're being exploited. Joe Biden went on a trip recently, to talk about and deal with something big. I'm not talking about East Palestine. He went across the country, across the world to go to Ukraine. And you know who showed up in East Palestine? I'm sure people have seen this. None other than former President Donald Trump, who has gotten tremendous play out of this. This is Trump at a McDonald's in East Palestine, where he bought people food and he was signing people's hats, "Make America Great Again." This is a gift from the Biden administration to the Republican Party to basically sit this one out, right? A significant failure in government policy, right? Absolutely. This shit starts with Trump. Biden's been president long enough to deal with this. Buttigieg has been in power long enough to deal with this. Buttigieg couldn't even be bothered to talk about this until people started making a big enough deal about it. This is Trump in East Palestine, and look at the response that he's getting for showing up for people.
Thank you, sir. Honor to meet you, sir. Mr. Trump, what do you make about Biden not showing up? You showing up before he did.
Thank you so much for coming.
I think it's terrible.
Thank you so much.
It's terrible.
Hey, Trump, take a picture of my phone. Picture? There he is. There's Trump, the real president. Sign it? President Trump. Thank you, Trump. Will you sign it?
What message does this send to the people in East Palestine? What message does this send to workers in the railroad, industry? What message does it send to the workers in Warrior Met? When people are told time and time again, these are the most important elections of our life. These are fights for a more pro-union country, right? Joe Biden loves. I'll play a second from this. We put this um, on the show when we were talking about East Palestine earlier this week. But this is how Joe Biden was talking about himself, in the election, going
As
into the
I said,
election.
and clean our streets. Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built this country, and unions built the middle class. I'm not joking. Without unions, there'd be no middle class. That's a fact. And by the way, there's a reason. You're the best trained workers in the world. That's not hyperbole. When you do well, everybody does well. Grow up here in Scranton.
You don't have to watch the whole thing. You remember how Joe Biden was talking. Not only has Joe Biden not shown up in East Palestine, a few months back when railroad workers were saying this scheduling system that we have is going to lead to industrial accidents. This is going to lead to communities dealing with dangerous chemicals being spilled in their communities. This was one of the major complaints from the railroad unions going into that potential strike. That's something they've been talking about for years. It's not something that just happened randomly. They've been saying our work is getting more and more dangerous because the companies are trying to squeeze us and they're trying to treat us like machines instead of people. They're limiting the amount of people who are working on the rail. They're limiting and they're increasing the length of our trains, meaning that it's virtually impossible to be able to do adequate safety checks of all of the cars on these trains. Right? They go on for miles. You can't do that with a small crew of a couple people, right? The railroads were trying to limit that to one or two folks. They've been saying we need to have more control over the work that we're doing because we understand what's at risk here. We understand it way better than the folks who took a management course that is trying to treat human beings as inputs into a system. We understand these systems way better than them. And we are saying we're asking for better scheduling and we're asking for better and safer working conditions. Working people want to be safe at work. Working people do not want to go to work one day and be on a train and then have it derail and toxic chemicals be spilled into a community. That's not what they want. They were literally organizing to try and stop that. And the message that the Democratic Party gave to those workers is that the Democratic Party stands against you. When you say you're going to go on strike and withhold your labor to demand that these companies start acting reasonably and rationally and not putting the entire country at risk, the Democratic Party said, you know what, we stand with the profits of the railroad industry, right? You saw it again when Joe Biden refused to stand up and show up in Alabama for these coal miners for 23 fucking months. The only person who showed up of like that kind of national profile, Bernie Sanders. Right? It's Bernie Sanders showing up. And at a certain point, Bernie's going to show up because that's what he does. Right? And it's great that we have him. But the blame needs to be made clear. People talk about, working people voting against their interests all the time. Right? They love to wag their fingers at folks. What do you expect is going to happen when the Democratic Party has sat over deindustrialization in this country, sat over trade deals that decimated the working class, overseen massive waves of disinvestment into communities, overseen massive doses of austerity to working people, right? And then when people were saying, you know what, we're going to organize and stand up and try to fight for a better future, and the Democratic Party says, oh, we're not going to get involved in that. That's not our job, right? What message does that send to people? Trump is obviously using this in a cynical fashion. Trump, too, stands with the railroad industry. The point is that if Trump is so hypocritical about this kind of thing, why let him go there and be able to say, look, I'm standing for you. It's a terrible crime that Joe Biden's not here. Why let him get away with that? Right? It shows that the Democratic Party and their consultants are comfortable with the fact of class D alignment in this country, are comfortable with the fact that their share of working class communities is declining, right? You could talk about, there's two different questions here, right? There's maybe winning an election with the coalition of the wealthy and powerful and more urban people in this country, right? And this is a separate question from the kind of political economy question of who is in your coalition. And what is becoming very, very clear is that the Democratic Party is very happy to excise working class people in pursuit of winning over more of the comfortable and powerful in this country. And that's been going on for a while, but it has accelerated in the past decade, right? And it's dangerous. It sets us up for a really, really dangerous future where, if the Republicans, the party of deregulation, the party of the bosses, is able to continue picking up, these picking up portions of these communities, it sets up for a very, very dark political map and a really, really dangerous situation wherein when the Democrats do defeat the Republicans, right, when they don't shoot themselves in the foot like they did in 2016, nothing positive happens for working people. An endless cycle. Republican administration, things get worse. Democratic administration, things get worse. Wherein the decisions that you make at the polling place stop mattering as much, right? Because Joe Biden's not showing up for you and Donald Trump isn't showing up for you. It's disgusting to sit here and watch this. It is inexcusable politics right here to see the absence of, again, the most pro-labor administration in recent history, right? Joe Biden wanted to go down as the most pro-labor president in American history. And he can't even show up. He can't even show up for the fights that are happening right now. Because I'm inspired by the fights that are happening right now. But on a historic level, these strike waves are still unfortunately relatively small, right? So the ability of a president who wants to say that they stand for unions, that wants to see these things revitalized, not showing up to the ones that are happening, right, is even more inexcusable, right? Because it could be one thing if, oh, there's a strike happening every week, right? Oh, there's a union drive happening all the time, right? But they're limited. You can show up. You can show up. You can show support, and you can encourage the NLRB to start coming down on these companies, because the courts were playing in the favor of Warrior Met. The courts should certainly be coming at Tesla for this shit. And, we need to see much, much more punishment for what Howard Schultz has been doing, because companies are fine to get a little slap on the wrist 2 years later after the fact, right? Remember what happened in Bessemer, Alabama, with the Amazon facility there, right? Jeff Bezos was running like by the book illegal union busting campaign, from having hiring police department to basically moonlight as security guards at the facility. You're in rural Alabama, you see the cop, the cop, and the cop is also working for Jeff Bezos. That doesn't make you feel really safe to do organizing. It doesn't make you feel really safe when the ballot box is being filmed and is on the Amazon property. These things were illegal, and the NLRB said they were illegal. But how long did it take for that to come through? How long did it take for that to materialize? Right? By the time that it came out that the NLRB said, yeah, Amazon broke the rules, most of those workers had been pushed out of the company at Amazon. Right? They are willing to play the long game. Musk is willing to play the long game. Schultz is willing to play the long game. Norfolk Southern and the rest of the railroad companies are willing to play the long game. And the only thing that will be able to push that is, one, us getting more organized and more militant, or having, and ideally along with that, having a Democratic Party that is willing to push to utilize labor law in a way that's beneficial for working people instead of a hindrance for them. But folks, I'm going to roll down and take some questions from y'all. Again, feel free to, ask about anything within reason. I'm always happy to talk strategy or different topics with y'all. So these are always really nice to hear what y'all are thinking. It's infuriating for me, because we're in a difficult place on the left. We're in a difficult place in the country right now. And too much of the left right now is really willing to couch and to sort of be junior partners of this coalition that is very, very clearly losing working class people. And we need to become much more apparent and visible in the fact that there is an alternative to Trump austerity, to Trump war on workers, or to Biden austerity and to Biden's war on workers. If we don't get serious about trying to build that, I think that things are going to get much, much worse, unfortunately. Um, let's see. Bill Bradley says, "Wasn't the train that derailed in Ohio using a braking system invented in the 1800s? Why were those systems not regulated out of use 100 years ago?" Yeah, no, and well, this has to come from the government. And Obama tried to push to change these systems. Trump ended that, but Buttigieg has been in charge of the Department of Transportation for 2 years. Biden has been president um, for 2 years. And even internally, the Department of Transportation was saying this is a problem. We need to do something about this. And the reasons for not doing so were quote unquote cost. But what happened with the railroad companies over the past year? They've been making more money than they ever have in their history. They were buying back their own stock, right? Inflating the price of their own stock instead of investing in the safety and the technology necessary to make sure that things like this won't happen. But the railroad companies aren't scared. They're not scared. That's it. You talk to union folks who are organizing the railroad union, and they were saying this, that the railroad company is not worried about us going on strike because they're very confident that the United States government will back them and will break our strike. And unfortunately, they were right. Joe Biden and the Democratic Party all stood together, locked arms with the Republican Party to say, hey, you working people in the railroad industry, you don't have the same rights as other workers in the country. We're going to deny you your right to go on strike if these things come to an impasse, right? And until that changes, it's not going to change. As long as the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are willing to allow the railroad companies to wage war on their workers, to underinvest in safety systems in the cars and the rail cars, it won't get better. You have to have some kind of punishment for this kind of thing, or they're just going to do it because, these companies, they have one thing in mind at the end of the day. They want to realize the highest rate of return on their investment. That's it. They want to return as much money to shareholders as possible. And, derailment here, dangerous water conditions there, whatever. There's not going to be any punishment. It's very clear. Both of these teams, red team, blue team, will look the other way, right? Because, again, like Trump will show up here, he'll take pictures. Trump gets elected in 2024. He's not going to do shit about the railroads or shit for East Palestine. The people in East Palestine, one thing Biden could do right now is he could give people access to Medicare if you're in a disaster zone for life. And he should do that, but he won't. Let's see. Yeah, and again, Raven says, obviously Trump doesn't give a shit about these people. That's not the point, though. 100%. He gets to go there and he gets to say, like, look, I'm the one who shows up for you when something bad happens. I can't. I mean, this is an ad that, like, wrote itself, right? Trump showing up there, people excited to see him, and Joe Biden flying, out of the country, right? That's coming to a TV near you soon, unfortunately. And The Apprentice says the White House actually quashed the strike efforts of the rail worker union. Yeah, 100%. The demand to squash the union came from Joe Biden, right? That's who pushed it to put it on up to a vote in Congress. Okay, I'm looking for any questions before we roll. Scrolling down a little bit. Sorry. TOS Snitch says, I agree, it's so dumb. People judge didn't show up until today. It just gives the GOP thugs evil talking points. Unless the railroads have a secret deal to fund DNC, Biden political campaigns in exchange for protection. Well, they do give them a tremendous amount of money. That's, you can look that up. So it's not even secret, right? Look, it's, another thing happened with like the TVA a few years back. Where Democrats are so feckless. It's insane. Like the Tennessee Valley Authority, like one of like the crown jewels of like the New Deal era, right? Something that brought material benefits to people that has lasted for generations. Power to the South, affordable electricity to the South. An institution that is going to help us decarbonize right now, as I was talking about earlier. These pushes to move off of carbon intensive electricity production methods and move and invest more and more in small modular reactors for nuclear power. Right. These are things that are great. The TVA is a good thing. A rational, reasonable program would be to expand TVA all across the country, right? To have TVAs in all the regions in the country to start taking electricity under common and public ownership. In the TVA a few years back, we had Dustin Guastella on to talk about a piece by Fred Stafford, where there was massive outsourcing that was happening to workers there who were being pushed out of their jobs to be replaced by non-unionized workers at the TVA. The Democratic Party didn't show up for them. You know who did though? Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump. And what did they do? They didn't talk about austerity. They didn't talk about these kind of these threats to these things that are public goods and should be defended and should be benefiting the people in the community and benefiting the workers in those communities. Jeff Sessions and Trump came in and said foreigners are coming to take your jobs, right? And this thing only exists, right? These kind of like false narratives only can exist when the Democratic Party doesn't show up, and when the left is too disorganized to show up and defend these kind of things. Because the left has its own issues with the TVA, unfortunately. For the most part are pure NGO nonsensical speak. But read the Fred Stafford piece if you can't find it. Send me a DM and I'll send it to you. It's dangerous. Kilgore Kraut says, do you view the AFL-CIO bureaucracy as an inherent impediment to working class power? I'll tell you this. One of the most encouraging things that we've seen has been more and more push for more democracy in existing unions in this country. And you've seen that result in more militant and more pro-worker leadership. I think unfortunately, over the past 40 years, a lot of unions became pretty hard. What I mean by that is like they became very top down. They went on the defensive because unions have been under attack. But at a certain point, you can only defend for so long before you start ceding tremendous amounts of ground. So I think that some of the more militant leadership that we've been seeing, some of the demands for things like direct election of union leaders in unions, I think is a good direction for the union movement to be going. Autumn Leaves. I hate to disappoint, but I can. Autumn Leaf says, Dave, can you still believe there's still fans of Secretary Pete Buttigieg around? And they're going after people on Twitter who criticize him. Some of them are still saying Pete won Iowa in 2023. I know. Well, look, sad and wild to find out that a lot of these folks were actually directly paid by the Democratic Party to produce this nonsense. I mean, I've seen, I've had some of these weird B people or whatever they're called show up, and attack me. It would be funny if it wasn't so tragic that Pete Buttigieg basically was sort of rewarded with a cabinet position because of his role in helping encouraging people to drop out so everyone could coalesce against Biden to prevent a pro working class candidate like Bernie Sanders win the presidency in 2020. It would be very funny to just see how badly he's failed at something that was supposed to be an easy job for him if it didn't have such high human consequences. And it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing how people talk about the right wing media and as they should. It's horrible. It's frightening to see what people believe. It's amazing to see the kind of lies and purposeful misdirection that comes out of like pro-Democratic Party news sources too on somebody like Pete Buttigieg, who in any reasonable, rational country would have been fired. Hell, if the train derailment wasn't bad enough for what happened in aviation with Southwest Airlines recently, right? That's his job to deal with this kind of thing, and he's completely protected in this bubble, which again shows the Democratic Party isn't very interested in actually governing. All right, let's see. Tommy asked a question. Is the local power or national power more important to reducing energy costs? State or federal approaches, or both, with regards to nuclear and TVA? How to rewrite the laws? Green New Deal. I think and to move off of fossil fuels is going to take a tremendous amount of investment. What the Biden administration is trying to do with IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is to try to encourage the private market to, to invest in these kind of things. And it's the height of like the liberal ideology, right? Is that like we're not going to do state investment, we're going to give tax credits, and these nice little treats to people who do what we want. It won't be up to the task of actually doing the kind of investment. I mean, the Green New Deal was a program that was going to cost trillions, right? And rightfully so. It's good. It's good to invest in the fucking country. The Democratic Party is too timid about this. Voters aren't. Working people aren't. You talk to people, it's like, hey, do you think we should be investing in better transportation options for you, in cheaper electricity for you, and greener electricity for you? People support that, right? We have tremendous amounts of money in this country, and the Democratic Party gets so timid about ever utilizing that to investment. In terms of investment, Tommy, I think that to really build out the renewable systems that we need, from wind and solar to nuclear, I do think you're going to need to have federal investment. I do think that you're going to have systems like the TVA, because all of these things have upfront costs that are expensive, especially if you want to do them to scale, right? Like, I think that like when it comes to solar and wind, we should be doing those like on industrial levels, in the sense of like, instead of doing household small level solar, we should be providing solar energy directly into the grid to be utilized, right? And that's being built out. It's not something that doesn't exist. But that's where the focus of investment should be. But the private industry is all over the place, right? It's not coordinated, right? This is one of the arguments that socialists make about the anarchic economy that we live in, is that you can't coordinate, you can't be rational, because electricity, like most things, they become much, much more efficient when you do them at scale. So, to invest in renewable energies like we need to, I think you're going to need to have federal investment. I do think like the institutions that control these things should be more regional, but maybe having being controlled under the DOE or something like that is probably the way to go, right? You need to have federal oversight, you need to have federal investment, because the fact is, unfortunately, like, I think that like being involved in local politics is critical. I think that that's something that we need to do. But when it comes to like the realities of the current conditions in the United States, most municipalities aren't doing well. A lot of states aren't doing well. You need to be able to utilize the full ability of the United States federal government's budget to be able to invest in these kind of things. So, it's got to be a dual track approach, in my opinion. Um, all right. Let's see. I'll take a couple more. I'm just trying to scroll through to find the questions. Um, the Apprentice, is there a chance that the Dems are throwing the next election to Trump? Where's Kamala Harris if Joe is busy overseas? I mean, I think that every time you give them these opportunities, these things, a closer 2024 election becomes more likely. I still think that that Donnie is going to be the Republicans' guy. I don't see enough from Ron DeSantis to knock him out. I don't want to play the devil's game of saying who would you rather go up against. I think they're both just awful, and really dangerous for the future of this country. I just don't see Ron DeSantis having the same kind of support as Trump does on a national level. So when you give them these kind of things, it puts that result way closer than it should be. And it's dangerous. It's political malpractice, and it puts a lot of people's lives at risk when you do shit like this. All right. Let's see. All right, y'all. I think that's it for questions, unless I was missing anything. Really appreciate hanging out with all of y'all. Reminder that we are moving Left Reckoning just an hour earlier. So we're going to be going live every Tuesday at 6 Central. I'm becoming an old man, so I need to go to bed earlier than we've been going to bed. And I think that it actually might work out better for everyone's schedules, get more folks in for live interviews on those shows. Do want to remind people that we have, if you haven't seen, we do have our wonderful merch. Our LR on the road t-shirts we only have a few left. So we're trying to move them quickly. Look at that handsome devil. We're doing a sale on all of our merch with the discount code Let's Ride. You get access. You can get that at leftreckoning.com/store. That really helps us grow. I mean, Matt and I have been really wanting to expand the show for a while. Unfortunately, we've been sort of sitting stagnant. We really wanted to we really want to bring in a third person to come in and help us expand our coverage and things like that. And we won't be able to do that without increasing without growing the program. So if you're not able to subscribe on patreon.com/left reckoning and getting all that bonus content, you want a hat or a shirt or something like that, you can get that at leftreckoning.com/store. Last ride for 15% off. All that really does help us continue growing, because no, like the wonderful folks at Valley Labor Report, Kim Kelly, the folks at the Real News, people in Labor Notes, etc. We're talking about what's happening in Wilmette. But there was an amazingly brutal blackout of this story that I think has that really touches at a lot of like themes in the media, right? It should be an easy thing to pitch to an editor, but they're not going to cover these things, right? People aren't going to cover what's going on with these union pushes all across this country without giving fair credence to the ideas of the bosses and the wealthy and the comfortable in this country. And building up strong independent media is really important for that. I also think expanding where we're doing it from, so it not all being located just in the major like New York City, LA, etc. It's also something that's really important, because there's a lot of stories, unfortunately, that those outlets miss, because they're not hearing about them, they're not familiar with them. We try in our own way in Left Reckoning to try to bring attention to some things that folks are missing, along with trying to build a strong working class analysis and building barbecue socialism. So if you support the project, it really does mean a lot to support us over at patreon.com/left reckoning. If you can't do that, you can feel free to buy a t-shirt or a hat at the LR store. We'll be back. I'm really excited to share this conversation I had with Amina Sheikh, who wrote an amazing piece on what's happening in Canada with the rise of the right there, very similar to some of the things that are happening in the United States. Some of the lessons that the left should be taking from the ability of the right to get into a lot of these communities and to speak to people's dissatisfaction and alienation. Some lessons that we really need to be taken seriously and growing. Right, we have to grow. We can't continue. We're shrinking right now across the board, unfortunately, and like we really need to reverse that. And I think some of these conversations can help us think about how we need to get there. So keep your eye out for that interview. We're going to have Luke Savage on the show soon too. We're going to be doing a deep dive into Reconstruction over the next 2 months as well. So catch all that over here at Left Reckoning. I'll be back Tuesday, 6 Central. We'll see you Sunday for the bonus episode for patrons. And take care, everybody, and see you soon.